And of course, technical difficulties, right? That's the way to start off.
So guys, just so you'll know, we are live. 6 seconds. Hey guys, to all the people that just joined, we are having some connectivity issues, trying to onboard Art into the panel. So we will be working behind the scene to hopefully make it happen. But meanwhile, we will kick it off with Colleen and with David, two friends. I think, what we will try to do here in the Cloud Generation Challenge is to have a friendly discussion. We have one of the biggest vendors that can represent, how they look at things. And we have David, who is managing one of the biggest financial organizations, for sure, one of the most important ones. And we have Colleen, that represents a CISO, that represents one of the most interesting companies that was born in the cloud. So I think we have, a whole around play here that I really hope will be interesting. So let's get right to it. Colleen, can you give a short intro, and then David?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to hear more intro later on, happy to give more detail. But the short of it is I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer over at Segment in San Francisco. It's like a small, medium-sized company at this point, again, born in the cloud. Before that, I was leading security over at Twilio before it went IPO to get it ready to go IPO. And then for a year or so afterward, that's my favorite spot in a company. It's like when they're thinking about growing up, that's when I like to come in.
David, go next.
Hello, David Katz, long-time financial services CISO, most recently with the Federal Reserve for the past, I'd say, going on 8 months. I am part of large institution supervision, so I'm the VP of Cyber and IT Risk Forum, so I am a regulator. So any opinion I express today is mine and mine alone and doesn't represent that of the Federal Reserve System.
Great. And guys, I'm Hili Kotler. I'm the CISO of FICO. Before I was the CISO of Amdocs. And, I started in the Israeli intelligence corps 20 plus years ago. So, David, the first question for you, if you can share a little bit about, before the pandemic outbreak, most of the organizations had a cloud-first strategy. For some, it was a more aggressive short-term strategy. For others, it was a long-term one. The pandemic, no doubt, has changed the rules of the game and forced most organizations to expedite their cloud-first plan. Can you share what you have seen and experienced?
So, based on my past experience, also as the CISO for a cloud, company, I'd say most of the organizations do have, as you mentioned, that cloud-first kind of policy. I'd say it was a little bit of the pendulum swing the other way if you were a highly regulated organization. I'd say while most of the organizations have, cloud-first strategies and we're moving pretty quick, I think, there's been some, well-publicized mishaps, even prior to COVID that have shown that, you still need to have a solid strategy and plan going into the cloud from that point of view and really looking at, understanding how you do the controls, how you do security, from that perspective. So I'd say, in the current pandemic, organizations are still exercising that cloud first plan. And if anything, it's potentially expanding the potential because organizations have kind of had to race to get their employees to a work from home basis. The cloud is offering other potential, avenues for them to do things that they need to do and enable their employees. But from a CISO point of view and a general experience point of view, you can always outsource anything, but you can never outsource accountability for the decision you make as an organization.
Great. Colleen, Segment was born in the cloud, as we mentioned. So the cloud is your home court. Still, with the pandemic presenting new challenges, was there anything outstanding you were required to do in order to keep up with the rising number of attacks and, the mobile workforce that came your way?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. And I also want to curb a little bit from David. David was like, these are my opinions of, from me as an independent security person, not of my company. I'm also going to say the same thing. It's not, I don't represent any company. This is just my my take on it. So my experience as a security practitioner during COVID and security leader is that you have an advantage if you start off with being like a cloud first type company. But I would say the thing that surprises and sometimes doesn't delight all of the security folks is you're used to having at least some of your population in the office. It was very rare to have a company that was 100% or nearly 100% remote. And what surprised us was there was a set of controls that we had that I think we depended on being able to walk by or to talk to folks in person, to be able to catch people in the hallway, to reinforce certain things. Because if 100% of your workforce is now away from you and you're used to having them around you, like, how are you going to remind them to lock their laptop before they go out for a coffee? How are you going to remind them if they have several roommates that, meetings such as this, like, you shouldn't have people walking by, there shouldn't be any way for people to eavesdrop, that their network should be secure at home. So there's a degree of control, even in a cloud first company, that you still have over your users in a non-COVID situation that I think all of our we're all struggling a little bit, like, this is really a test to see if our user training and the security controls that we have with regards to the user are as good as we think they are. And I think, quite honestly, they're probably not. So we're taking a look at a couple of things, like we were sort of leisurely rolling out a zero trust methodology and project. Now we are not leisurely rolling it out. Now we're looking at it a few different times a week and seeing what we can accelerate. So that's what it's done for us.
Okay, that's great. And by the way, I feel the same, and we do the same. We had a cloud first strategy to begin with. Most of the employees, we have 60 locations. Many of the employees are working from home. It still required us to make some adjustments to get used to the fact that not only 40% are remote, but now 100%, and the VPNs, are not necessarily the right thing to do these days. So to promote or to reprioritize plans that we had. So part of the headache that I feel that we all share. We are still having difficulties with art, but we are still trying. So bear with us. If anybody has questions, feel free to put it in the comment box, and we will try to address them later or during the discussion. David, what are those critical cybersecurity risks and initiatives that need to be addressed that were lost, deferred, maybe even ignored in the midst of the enforced transformation to remote workforce?
So I think, it highlighted a lot of aspects of it. I think for the most part, organizations did a pretty good job rushing their employees home. From that point of view. And, again, like anything we do, it comes with trade-offs. So part of that was, as you got everybody home, all of a sudden there were certain other issues that came to light, like all the organizations are competing for the same assets. We have to provision equipment, we have to get equipment, we have to be able to lay down images and things like that. So now all of a sudden the equipment issue and getting assets out there was a challenge. And then, looking at it from the point of view of managing those images, managing things like that got put out there. And then even your reliance on your third parties. So, if you had large corporate campuses where you had privileged users that were from a third party vendor that usually would only have that level of access from your corporate campus, now all of a sudden you have to look at, dealing with that from their remote location on what asset are they using and how do you assure, that your vendor is taking the same steps that you considered. So part of it was, again, business trade-offs, getting everybody back, but, kind of revisiting and making sure those risks that you initially accepted, either passively or intentionally, getting everybody home, that now you revisit those on your risk register. It's kind of getting back to that basic blocking and tackling of InfoSec of the, what's changed, how did it impact your identity and asset management? How does it impact your monitoring? How does it impact your relationship with third parties? So, there's an expectation that you have to make some of those trade-offs, but there's also an expectation that you're not going to forget about that and leave that linger.
Colin, anything to add?
I think he's exactly right. And David, I was going to ask you as a fellow leader, like, how do you represent that change in, the risk posture to your board? Like, sorry to throw a surprise out there, but I was like, you know what? I think it's time for me to do an update. So I need to make sure I'm representing like, hey, our population's at home now. And so some things have changed and I'm reordering on the risk register that I have some of the things on here. And so they're going to be slightly surprised when they see a different order. So what are you doing to let them know?
Yeah, so fortunately, I mean, from a regulatory point of view, I'm in kind of a different perspective. I usually am the one that asking, the institutions, what are they doing about it? But from the aspect of, I think it's just that expectation of having to revisit what you were doing and that, controls that were ideally designed for your corporate campuses now probably have to be revisited from that point of view. Monitoring capability that you relied on from your corporate, campus, your ability to push patches and updates, all of that stuff. Now you have to look at it differently. And that's some elements where cloud is coming into play as well, because now all of a sudden, you can, increase your VPN connectivity, but it still doesn't mean you can push unlimited stuff through those pipes.
So David, would you say that organizations that, rushed into, cloud first or remote workforce, are they less secure than they were before? Do you feel in your industry that those things were done in a calculated manner?
So again, it's, for me, it's kind of like about the thoughtfulness of the process. Understanding that, obviously in times of crisis, it's, the fundamental 101 as a CISO or as a security professional, you fight with what you have and then you kind of build a list of what you need, knowing you may or may not get it depending upon how things are operating. But I'd say it's, whether the risks were well thought out, whether it was conveyed appropriately to senior management so they're aware and making an informed trade-off. And really, going, being in the cloud for a long time prior to joining the Fed and even prior to joining IBM, operating in the other big CSPs from a customer point of view, it's really looking at it from the point of view of, do you have the right skill set for as you transition in the cloud to actually manage through that process and handle the infrastructure and handle really infrastructure as code? Because, from a more classic model, usually it takes, several bad things to line up for something to happen in your traditional racking and stacking infrastructure, laying down ACLs or other things like that. Usually several things have to line up for something bad to happen. The benefit of cloud and that rapid deployment also means that, good things or bad things can happen faster. It just depends on whether you understand what you're doing.
Okay, guys, we have a question from the audience. Colin, with shift left trend, how do you work with engineers and DevOps? What works, what doesn't?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's so many juicy comments here. I was looking at the comments and then I was just hearing what David said. I'm like, how do we like merge all of them? So one of the things that's top of mind for me is because it's a cloud first company, as David alluded to, like its infrastructure is code. There are more people who are producing code, which means that is just a larger surface area that the users are producing for you. And so education becomes super, super important. In the time of COVID, like you can't just walk up to those developers or those infrastructure developers and say, hey, let's go get a coffee or hey, let's get lunch together. Nobody's getting anything with anybody, because it's all socially distant. And so I think doubling down on education is super helpful. One thing that we've tried to do to stay on top of the stuff that we can't see is giving every developer or anyone who would churn out any kind of code, whether it's for the infrastructure or for the app, the ability to do their own threat model. So I'm not saying that we are, we're shifting all the way left and then we're like falling off the left side. It's more that, why do we need to wait until somebody has an idea for a product and maybe it's at a certain state, they've written their solutions design document and they're maybe like midway through the thought process and then we sit down with them and do the threat model. Why can't we teach them the fundamentals of how an attacker would view their stuff? They already know how a user should view or use their stuff. How would an attacker do it? So teaching them those fundamentals seems to help a bit because a heads up is something that we're missing all being at home. Like we don't, David, you don't have the ability to walk by, and buy some treats for people or hand out like security champion gifts or something like that. You have to enable them with knowledge to be able to find these mistakes before they happen and to come to you and say, I need to sit with someone on your team because I'm anticipating like making changes to authentication to this app. And it feels like an area where I should get security person to help, and even better if they approached you and said, and thank you for the rubric on the rudimentary threat model on how I can do this. I'm going to turn that into you as like the first step, and then, engaging you, maybe submitting a ticket to your team, and you can guide me on the rest of the way. So you kind of have to give up some of, as my friend and colleague Frederick Lee over at Gusto says, you have to give up some of those Legos. Otherwise, there's just no way that you can build it all yourself. You'll always be late. You'll always miss things. And you'll always be in this position where you feel like you're babysitting the rest of engineering when actually they're very capable of taking care of themselves up to a point.
Yeah, I will add one or two things with your permission. I know that, we have many startups here that, that bring solutions to the table that will help us shift left. I think this is critical for the process, but I think, adjusting to the way the company is working, the developers, the DevOps, everything around the cloud adoption of a company that is actually or literally developing into the cloud around the processes are critical component even before you embed new technologies. The technologies comes after. I think, today when, regardless the pandemic, when you inject code twice, 3 times a day or a week even, the processes that were before around the SDLC no longer relevant. And the things that needs to be done is to understand much better security, needs to understand much better how the developer thinks, how the developer is working, the life cycle of development end to end, which is completely new today, not relying on the tech stack that was before, but as an infrastructure, as a code, and managing to bring the right people, the right technologies, embed into the right processes in order to make the product fully baked from development through the life cycle of deployment and operation. Quick question around the cyber attacks or the rising of the cyber attacks. So if we go to the springtime, the FBI mentioned that cyber attacks have spiked by 400% during the pandemic. Is the number still in rise, David, from what you see? I know that, it was supposed to be art, with what they see in the research center, but do you see that it is still the case? And also, if the flavor of those attacks are different than before?
Yeah, I'd say, some of it is what's old is new again. I mean, just as in, from a CISO point of view of, never waste a good crisis for helping, mature your security program, the attackers also never waste a good crisis too for other means of getting access. Because again, as you mentioned earlier, that if you are used to managing now, formerly a corporate campus of like 30 offices, now all of a sudden you might be managing 3,000 because you have that many people working remotely. So the surface area has increased greatly. And as well, when you're dealing with things like, it's pandemic, so people are concerned, it's just very easy routes of getting people, to click on things if crafted correctly. And, it's been a struggle even for large, healthcare organizations, because it's not like you can just block everything labeled COVID-19. From that point of view, from a healthcare industry point of view. So some of it is just, the usual leveraging. I think now having everybody remote, it's, even more convenient from that point of view of the, I've got a much greater attack surface area, so I can just go for it and see what sticks. From that point of view, that coupled with the fact that, as Colleen mentioned, people are working at home in different environments and things like that. You have families, you have maybe roommates, you have coworkers, you have all these other things. So people get distracted, and it makes it, I think, that much easier for the potential attacks. Not that we've seen a significant enhancement in how they're accomplished. I think it's just ease of target area.
Colleen, anything to add?
Yeah, just a quick note. David, you said I don't think we've seen like a major increase. Let me just knock on, as you know, all security people are a little bit superstitious. I'm in line with the comments that he has there. I actually was taking a quick look, sneaking a look over on the comments, like they're building up pretty quick there. Do we want to try to see if based on some of the stuff, we can incorporate some of the comments there to give a little bit more flavor on what the audience is hoping to hear?
Absolutely. So there is a question around accountability. So how do you able to hold engineering DevOps accountable for security quality? Are they measured on security quality? Colleen?
Oh, yeah. So we have really just started on our metrics journey. It was probably late last year that we really kind of got our act together as a security org. And I think it's one of the things that dogs every security team and security leader is like, how the hell do you measure this? Like, how do you know that your program is any good? You know, other than your gut and your experience that tells you these are the things that need to be done. You know, this is what users of all levels need to be taught. This is, you know, the list of controls you need. But how do you explain to an executive or to one team, like this team is doing better security wise than this other team? We had to start with, we were using Jira or Jira Shop, and we were measuring logic level vulnerabilities. And so we made sure that everything went into Jira. We had the correct assignment. So it's the correct team and the correct person. And then we were very clear on what the SLA was. You know, if it's a P3, it needs to be done in P3 weeks. And we're very clear about what needs to be fixed, what the expectation is. We went through with all the teams, when you get a ticket that looks like this is how you make sense of it. This is the expectation on the security side. And here's what will happen if that doesn't happen. And after we gave folks a bit of runway, because we didn't want to just start publishing reports on them, because it feels a bit not team building. We started measuring by, we call them by pillar. So it'd be like a large area. Security is its own pillar that has multiple security teams within it. We would measure by pillar who was late on these, who had breached SLAs when it came to these vulnerabilities, and who was on time. And over time, you could see the bar chart like creep up of a particular pillar that wasn't doing as well. And then we essentially take a snapshot of that every Monday, and we send it out to the executive team, or subset of the executive team, including our CEO. And I will tell you that started turning around behavior pretty fast. You know, there were various reasons. Some people either said something like, hey, I think this is misassigned. We recently had a mini reorg. It's actually with this team and they're late, not us. Or, you know, I tried explaining to, you know, the security person who assigned this to me that it's actually this, this, and this, and we need a project instead of a vulnerability ticket. But once those things fell away, then it was very clear for each pillar to see how they compared with other pillars. And knocking on wood again, it's working. And so we're going to broaden that approach, since we worked out a lot of the bugs, to every type of vulnerability. So then that was logic level vulns. Now we're talking about things like Docker vulns, AMI issues, or even like, you know, maybe there's a pillar that's trying to get third parties in here without the proper evaluation, and we caught them. And so that would become a vulnerability, and that will also show up on that report every week.
Great. So there is a last question that I think can complement what you just elaborated around, Colleen. Any specific recommendation for SLAs for developer implementation? I think, guys, you know, I will take it. I think, you know, SLAs around fixing is, you know, thinking a little bit the old fashion. I think, as Colleen mentioned, when everything shift left, when the processes becoming and the tooling becoming security and DevOps together, you know, and everything is written in DevOps and all the security scannings are at the right place, you shouldn't get to the point that you have SLAs, because you should also have cadence for, you know, redeployment of containers if they are vulnerable, so redeployment of AMIs if they are vulnerable in the cloud. So those things, I feel, right now shouldn't be the case for SLAs, rather than clear rules and responsibilities and understanding on what or how the company is developing, deploying, and operating their product. Guys, we got to the end of our discussion. David, Colleen, it was great moderating the discussion with you. Any last words for the audience?
Thank you for your time. And I would say, just as everybody's still working from home and things like that, just don't forget to reevaluate the fundamentals of your security and privacy program to make sure you've captured the changes or what's changed. If nothing's changed, you probably need to revisit it.
Absolutely. Like there's so much that's different about our world, and then so much that stays the same. But what can help you maybe be a little bit more successful where you feel like you're on this island by yourself trying to do security, as much as you can, pull other leaders from like sibling teams in to help you solve some of these challenges. If you're not having one-on-ones with them, have one-on-ones and say like, hey, this is what keeps me up at night as a security person. We're all at home, and then like there's all these Docker patches that aren't happening. Like, what can we do about it? Don't forget about the human element and having those one-on-ones with your fellow leaders, because it's not just a security problem, it's a company problem.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody that joined us this morning, this evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much. See you soon.